Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are joining us. This is Living in Between Worlds. We are a collective of first and second generation immigrants from America, Canada, all over the world, diasporas of the world, and we come together to connect over deep healing conversations on topics that many of us may not talk about, to our friends, to our family. And so this is kind of created space for us to gather and really open our hearts up to talking about things that really matter to us that we've been kind of either bottling in or either just fun conversations like today. We're going to be connecting over talking about food. So we invite you to come join us through our meetups, through our Facebook group. All of the links are in the description. And today's topic is on connection through food. And I decided to choose this topic because it's just fun, right? Like it's one of those things where like it's a common denominator. Food is a common denominator. And, when we're thinking about living in between worlds, it's the one thing that actually bridges everyone together as human beings. We all eat. Well, I can't speak for everybody, but most of us enjoy food, and there's going to be some certain foods that really connect people together. And I always found it so fascinating that, if I think back about kind of some of my fondest memories of gatherings, it always involved food, right? And so this is where I just thought, you know what, let's gather, let's talk about, I'd love to hear from you ladies on the kind of memories that you have had with food. And just, I know we're going to be salivating throughout this whole conversation. I'm already thinking about all the foods and it's I hope all of you have had something in your stomach already. Or maybe this conversation might inspire you to go out and try different foods. But let's just see where it takes us. So I would love to start off the conversation by just asking, what was your kind of earliest memory of food and gathering? Who wants to start? Well, I can start. So for me, food and gathering brings me back to my grandmother. My grandmother, the earliest memory was always my grandmother's cooking. She just created such amazing dishes, and it was always one of my favorite parts of my day. She taught us so much through food. There were certain types of food that was good for you, for your health. So I think for me, it was definitely dinner times with my grandmother, and just her knowledge through kind of the little things that she would teach us, like having more vegetables was going to be good for you. And, something that I felt kind of, proud of, but most people think would be gross, would be having fish and then having steamed fish and then having the I'm going to go right in, having the eyeball of the fish, right? But she always made it she always told us that, okay, having that is going to increase your eyesight. It's going to improve your eyesight, right? Things like that. Having bitter melon, even though it tasted gross when we were kids, it was really good kind of food for healing, right? So it's it'll make you smarter, certain kind of aspects of food would, we would learn through my grandmother. So that was kind of my earliest memory of food and gathering. Anyone else would like? Yes, Maria.
I can second you. Of course, my earliest memories with my grandma. I grew up with her. She raised me, and um, it's a lot around the legacy, right? Like she used to make these delicious meals every day, which was like for me hard to believe. For me, my grandma was magical. I was like, how come she has this power inside of her to not follow any kind of recipe, only just a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then ta-da, right? Delicious. And but it was all the all what was around it, like she sharing with me that she learned to do that dish because her mom or because her grandma, so that's the legacy, right? And at the same time, like grabbing her shopping bag that she had only one, right, that it belonged to her, and just walking and picking the, the right food, and saying like, I only remember, Nuria, you just have to buy the chicken in this store, not other one, or that guy, doesn't give you the best apples or whatever it was. So always there was a process and there was like harmony around making food. But if I could define with one word, I would say food was equal to caring. It transformed in something else later on, but I'm sure we're gonna touch on that later on.
There's so much stuff to talk about this stuff. Like, this is such a great topic. I don't want to keep jumping around because there's so many things that came up just from talking, like hearing you two say things. But just on the topic part, this is one thing I feel very confident to say that food is something that allows us to experience other ethnicities in a way, like, because there's no other thing out there that we can go and experience other cultures. Like, we can go and try to immerse in different other events or something, but food is really the thing. Vanessa and I just met this weekend, are like, what are we going to eat? Like, what do we want? And then you have all the, like, countries of the world in Vancouver. And then that's the beauty about bringing food together and having us experience other cultures. We don't normally get to eat traditional food. But the interesting part about my earliest memory is my grandmother too. So there's also that trend. I actually want to jump into that after, maybe if I have a follow-up question, and what the role of the grandmother is with food. But I do remember being thrown in to learn the traditional ways early. Really young, being involved in the kitchen really young with food, and just like understanding how long everything takes to make, because like your grandmother's older and they're in the kitchen all day, and then they're making this huge meal. Filipinos don't have place settings when we eat. We have a buffet. We always set up a buffet, so like everyone has to take food home. And then you're just like, just this little lady is there just doing everything, and then I'm there trying to help. And really understanding the beauty in all of that. And now thinking about me doing it now, just like, it was not a lot for them to do. They do their thing. They have their recipes in their mind. They're just tasting and doing things. But for me, if I was to replicate that, what a beautiful, really special thing that not a lot of us get to do, to spend a whole day and really work on nourishment and doing the traditional ways of our ancestry. So now I'm having a really deep appreciation just like thinking about those memories. And I do agree, the best memories of coming together is through eating and through food, like elaborate meals, like with events that we host with our family. How about you, Sonia?
Hi. Thank you for the question. I was assessing my internet connection. That was kind of choppy, but I think it seems to be okay right now. So yeah, I really love how food is a really, I mean, it's a big topic, because it is true that it's one of those things that we all share as like humans. It's a very, I would say, like a ritual that has such a long history that it's still like very important today. I think for me, one of the earliest memories I have I would say it's also in my kitchen with my grandmothers, because I had one kind of maternal grandmother, but another kind of adopted grandmother that I had the privilege to be taken care of by two grandmothers in that house. And I can still like picture the two of them, and we would have this tradition of kind of having takeout from like a Chinese place back in Caracas. And that was kind of like my favorite treat, with like, oh, it was like the super kind of like traditional, kind of like the Chinese food that's like spread all over the world, like a General Tao chicken and stuff. But I would just love the sweetness of it, and like it was so delicious. And I think for me, it represents just like the comfort of it all. The fact that we had like a tradition on like Sundays was like takeout day. That was like, I love having that expectation and that consistency. And I guess something also interesting related to food in my case is that I was born in Venezuela, but then my dad was born in Peru and my mom was born in Chile. So I always had like a lot of different influences of food, which was an amazing thing. But also I had this weird thing where I remember bringing like some sandwiches to school, and people would be like, they look weird. And like, because the way of, I mean, the way of making the combining the ingredients or something, I would put like tomato and like butter in my sandwich. Apparently that was like a very Chilean thing to do. And all like my Venezuelan friends were kind of like, why do your parents put tomato on your sandwiches? And it was just kind of funny. But yeah, I would say I have a very positive association to food, and I really love eating. So I love that we're discussing this topic at large with all its implications. So thank you for inviting.
Yeah, so good, right? Like just all the once you start talking about food and memories, it's like the floodgates kind of turn on and it just opens up, right? Like, so I'm curious to know, like, I want to go back to kind of what Stephanie was talking about grandmothers and food. Like, what was the question you wanted to ask, Stephanie?
Well, it's actually kind of interesting. It might not even be just grandmothers, but even our mothers,
Yes,
mothers, or a person at home who does the majority of the cooking. I think like coming in and moving as an immigrant to Canada, like a first or second generation, it's going to impact the traditions of that. Like I know that in my family, my grandmother's probably the last one who was holding on that tradition of cooking, because my mom had to come here and just work. So like it was just working, and then there's that lost art. It's gone. Like if I didn't absorb what I got from my grandmother, and really actively try to bring it back, it's gone. So like, how has that tradition impacted your upbringing or your families as they came into this new place? Were they able to pass on those traditions, or do you find that it's kind of like with the food of our ancestry, is it kind of going away and we're losing some of those things? Nuria.
Well, I think it's a great question, Steph, because I don't know what happened, but at least in my family, like once someone becomes grandma, they're great to make meals. Like, I don't know, but while you're a mom, you're not really capable. I remember my mom wasn't good. And once she became a grandma, it's like, shut up. Like suddenly she was, my daughters have like great memories about my mom's food. And I'm like, really? Right? So yeah, I think it's something that it happens over time, at least in my culture, probably that you are more relaxed or more like, okay, like I can enjoy, it's not that duty. I can enjoy to offer and serving in a good way. And I have to say that there are so many things that I learned from that environment, that was food equals to not being lonely. And at the same time, limits your potential in the role that you're playing in your household. Because if you are a girl, you have to be in the kitchen learning how to cook, period. It's not negotiable. And if you are a boy, you just have to sit down and wait to get your dish done. And at the same time, because I come from a really matriarchal family, the kitchen represented lots of control and lots of manipulation. I'm sorry, I know it's not that a delicious ingredient to bring on the table and on the conversation, but it's true. It was like lots of manipulation, right? Like, it's like, don't get grandma be bad because, or in a bad mood because, like she's making food. Or if grandma is in a bad mood, probably she's not going to cook today, or she's going to give us a shitty food. So there was lots of control on it. And at the end of the day, grandma decided not only about the food, but about so many decisions that were taken over dinner. So, like, it wasn't that she was really like actively speaking, but it was, pass me the tortilla, and by the way, like these comments under the tortilla, no? Like, that was like lots of control on it. So I have these memories or these reflections of, well, it was caring, but also it was controlling situations and people and limiting roles, 100%.
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. It's really kind of like spinning my mind a little bit and getting me to think about all the different aspects, because I think it's almost like, like women, we get kind of cornered into these roles, but like that was what worked in order to create that power to have a little bit more control. It's like, yeah, I can control you through food, right? This is where I can actually have a place to speak up and make decisions and say things, right? So, oh, wow, that's so interesting. For myself, I have like my grandmother. Yes, she was the main person that made all the meals. Like I grew up with, my parents were divorced. So I lived with my dad and he worked. And so my grandmother would actually she was in charge of all the meals. And I just remember what I loved about my connection with my grandmother was just, she's a teacher naturally. So just standing next to her and just watching her cook. And as she's cooking, she's like teaching me something at the same time. And now that you mentioned this, Nuria, she would also kind of like add in her little philosophical thinking into our conversations. Like, here are some things to think about, Vanessa, as you're growing up, right? Like, like there's a lot of life. She taught me a lot of like life skills through just watching her, just standing next to her and watching her. And it was so interesting what you said about your mom not really kind of cooking. And I feel like my mom was like the same thing. My mom, she kind of, I think she had to learn how to cook, but she wasn't really into it until like we were adults. When like now she creates like massive meals, like whole feasts. And it's like, and herself, like she had mentioned to me before, she's like, I never knew how to cook. I had to learn how to cook. Right. And it wasn't through her mom that she really learned too much of it. She actually learned on her own. And I feel like, thinking about my own journey, I would learn a few things from my grandmother, and it was just like I would just keep cooking the same thing, like steamed vegetables with like chicken, right? Like saute chicken with some soy sauce. And that was like my meal with rice, right? Like that was just kind of something simple that I could keep going to. So the tradition was passed on in that way. But my friends would come over who knew how to cook, and they would bring pots and pans. They would bring the utensils to my kitchen because they're like, you don't have anything in your kitchen. Let me bring all the stuff and let me cook. So it was so interesting to kind of learn through my friends as well. So there was that. But I kind of also want to go back to like talking about just even, or just sharing kind of the rituals of after, like there's the eating part and then even the cleanup part or the setting of the table, right? Like, I think that's where my cousins and we really bonded, because we ended up like, we were the ones that washed the dishes, and washing the dishes is a whole thing too, right? Like when you're teaming up, one person washes, the other person rinses, and another person dries, right? So it was like a total kind of team aspect of it. And my cousins and we really bonded over that kind of aspect of it as well. But I think that's in terms of traditions and being passed down, that's kind of how it happened for myself.
I think it was so interesting, everything that's been said on all the potential angles in which we can bring this discussion. But something that Nuria said about the whole thing about control that really struck a chord with me too, because I remember seeing kind of the first examples of kind of mother and daughter conflict. I would see that play between my mom and my grandma in the kitchen, and I would like I can remember kind of like see some of these exchanges and being like, oh, there seems to be a bit of tension there. And you know, as a kid, you don't know like what's going on, but it would be something like, yeah, my grandmother either, you know, telling me my mom how to do something, and my mom being like, you're in my house, this is how I do things, and my grandma being like, no, you're not supposed to do it like this, blah blah blah. And then they would get kind of like in these confrontations, and it was all happening in the kitchen, you know, and while they were like cooking something, cleaning, whatever. So yeah, it's really funny, because I think when I sometimes think of my grandmother, and I'm kind of like, I do get this sense of like, oh yeah, that was like her being kind of like manipulative or controlling or something. And so that's like one side of the story. But then as you were saying that, and I mean, now that I'm, you know, an adult and I can see things from a different perspective, I'm kind of like, I don't know, I just felt like a lot of compassion, in the sense that, I mean, what Vanessa was saying, it's like, well, of course, if that's the only area in which you have some sort of control, well, of course you're going to go all in with it, right? It's like when I think of my grandmother, like she, you know, she came from she was born like in the 1910s or something. She already passed away many years ago, but it's like she didn't go to school, she didn't have like a career, or like, so it's like, of course it was going to, I mean, your need to control something, it was going to show up somewhere like that. So it was very interesting, because it made me kind of see that kind of image, that memory, through a lens of like a lot more compassion, and being like, well, of course, you know. And it's probably like a pattern for a lot of women of, you know, that generation. So that was like a very, very interesting, I totally love your comment of like the message on what do you say, like under the tortilla, like best. So yeah, I totally love that point. But then yeah, with regards to kind of like the differences I've seen, it's very funny, because I mean, I've seen my parents kind of have the full transformation, in the sense that when we were back in Venezuela, my parents had a clothing factory that was relatively quite successful in its best years. And then, you know, with the economic crisis and government and so on, it's like it started kind of like decreasing, and that's when they decided to move. But I would say like in the best years, they would work a lot. They would have a lot of employees. They would be at work most of the day. So they would hire help for the kitchen. So it's funny because I saw that part where we would get help, and it would be very kind of like that. Yeah, like when they were like successful and so on. And then like when we came here, where it was like, okay, no more help, you have to start from scratch and so on. And I think in both ways, like they adapted really well. Definitely with my parents, my mom has been the one doing the cooking most of the time, I would say. She has the advantage that she does seem to like it. Of course, at some points it's kind of like, I mean, of course, at some point she does get mad that it's like I'm the one still doing the cooking here, which is totally understandable. But she also has this attitude of cooking where she loves to kind of like, she works really well with like constraints, and I love how she has this kind of like creative process. Like I sometimes go visit them and she's like, there's nothing in the fridge, and then she's like, let me see what I can put together. And it's like you can see like the creativity and kind of like the connections, and sometimes she makes like some of the most amazing recipes like that. So, and that's something that she developed more like in her, you know, later years, and as a result of you know, coming here. And of course, having to, you know, new immigrant, having to be like more thrifty, you know, save money and so on. So it's funny because I kind of seen kind of the full transformation when, you know, we would have like the help, and it would be all like the very, you know, we would live in a big house and whatever. And like when they came here in their 50s, and being like, now it's like you do everything yourself and so on. But they have adapted like wonderfully. And it's really funny because during the pandemic, when, you know, everyone needed a hobby or a creative outlet, my mom was like, I want to do recipes on YouTube. I want to share my recipes. I was like, yay. So it was really cool because I helped her. She has like probably like 30 videos or something on her YouTube channel. And it was really fun because I taught her, I'm not going to do it for you because I already have too much work, and I'm going to probably resent you if I have to do it for you. But I told her, I can teach you how to edit your videos and do your thumbnails and so on. And she was a great student. So there's like recipe videos of my mom in Spanish, if anyone wants to see. Shout out to my mom.
Oh, that's great. Wow. I definitely want to see if it was in English. I would probably want to learn. But it's great. Then you can continue the traditions, right? Like you have something that you can have in the future. Because I was thinking about like how the role of the grandmother, maybe this could be another topic because I'm really sentimental. I was really close to my grandmother growing up. You know, when she passed away, everything else kind of went away too. So like the family gatherings, like to that extent, like they're really the person who brings everyone together. And it's either like when you come into that role, you kind of just pop in and you're like, hey, now I'm that person, like learning how to cook or whatnot. And just but then also I think I like now, at least from my age, it's really coming home and trying to learn to appreciate what we had growing up with the cultures and traditions of the food. Instead of me going out to buy. My mom would be more to go to the Filipino store and buy. But for me, I'm like, okay, let me go home. I'll go and set it up. I'll put it in the pot for a few hours. Let me try and see what I can do. But it's really interesting about like how close traditions and is tied with food. But with our rituals with tidying up, we too grew up, like my mom grew up with help in the house. So in the Philippines, it just seemed like it doesn't matter how poor you were, you always had someone more poor to help in the house. So it was, I don't know how, like, for me, when I went to visit, I was just like, oh my God, I can't ask her to do that. They're like, it's their job, you have to. And I'm like, no, like, I can't get used to those things. But they really just had somebody do everything. Like, even if my grandmother did cook, but they did still have someone to help put out the food or like put away the dishes. So like, I think when it came up to me and my brother growing up, we didn't have to do it. Like we would just put it in the sink and somebody else would do it. And then that was how we grew up. And like, we didn't even have a place. Like it was kind of like a hybrid of Filipino food, but we're eating on TV dinner trays in front of the TV. That was the way that we grew up. We never sat at the table. Like everything was fast because my mom and dad both worked, so they'd get home like 6:30, 7 p.m. So where are we eating and going and hanging out and doing our own thing? So we never really had traditions like that, and we did a lot of takeout. Once my grandmother was gone, like we were eating takeout every single day, 2 times a day or more. So it's really, we're really the poster children of North American diet, my brother and I. But then because we lose those things and like kind of getting involved with having 2 parents who work, it's really hard to have a really good nutrition as a second generation Canadian. I'm lucky I don't have the same health issues as my brother, but diabetes is rampant in my family. But it's also about coming into this culture and eating convenience food and the quality of food that we have available to us here versus in the Philippines. Like, yes, we might buy a meat in a market that's been just freshly, I guess, killed versus like food here in these factory farms. It's really different being in North America. That's it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I didn't even like, I got so thinking about my grandmother and all the amazing food, but yeah, like growing up as a kid, thanks for that reminder. It was very much like after my dad got remarried again, we lived with my dad, and he didn't really like, he knew how to cook like Eggo waffles, and like maybe he might be able to mix some pancake mix, right? But everything else was like fast food, was quick food. I remember growing up on like Costco muffins and sausages, just putting it in the microwave with ketchup after school. And yeah, Eggo waffles was the thing to eat after school. I think we still made sandwiches, but it was like, your prepackaged like quick kind of hams, and it was just yeah, like now that you're talking about nutrition, it's which brings me to the next question. Like, I guess what is your relationship with food, and how is your upbringing with food kind of influenced your relationship with food, and how it's part of your life now?
I would say on my end, I have a good relationship with food, but probably for me was more different behaviors that I learned over dinner, right? Like things like you always have to say that dinner was delicious, otherwise grandma will be offended, and that helped grandma to play a victim role, right? Like, I mean, all day long in the kitchen for you guys, and now what do I get? Like, so what I learned was being a people pleaser and never go and visit and say, no, I'm full. No, if they give you more, get it in, right? Take it in, period. You don't say no. And another thing that it was a behavior that heavily influenced me was big meals and the setting of the table was based on how special the occasion was. So it didn't matter if it was like any normal day. Like there were like 2 factors in place. One was if any male family member was on the table, everything was beautiful. If we were only women, it didn't matter. So I grew up listening to, it's not a special occasion. So for me now, every single second is a special occasion. So when I see the table and it's not well set, I'm like, and my daughter's like, Mom, we're just, it's a scrambled egg. And it's like, it's not that. It's that we can, sit down and eat beans. It's about getting together and sharing this moment, that if we have this beautiful napkin, why not using it? Like, why not? Right? And I remember many times when there was like this special occasion at home, the first uncle I had who went to university was after school visiting, and he was leading the conversation, and the table was beautifully set, and nobody could interrupt my uncle because he had the truth, right? It's like, come on, it's just a meal. Like, I remember like I was like, I don't know, 8, 9, and it was like, wow, everybody was, and my grandma clap, 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 right? Tortilla, clap, clap, clap. This is the truth, So those roles really impacted me. Like, it took me years of therapy to realize, food is something else. Like, sharing that moment and that cultural practice is bigger than the special occasion, is bigger than who is making dinner. Like, it's bigger than that. But it took me a while to step out of the limitation of the victimism of who is doing what, or the role of cleaning after the family gather is women's responsibility. So it took me a while to step out of that, and right now I'm aware of it, and also I'm aware of, okay, Nuria, the table is not well set, just, it's okay as well, right? Like, still is a special, right? Because easily I can go to the other extreme, right?
I guess for me, so it's weird, it's actually interesting. So food to me, like growing up, is like, it is equated to status. So like if you have an event like in the Philippines, if I'm going to go visit the Philippines, they'll get out the whole red carpet, kind of like lay out the best like settings, like they'll kill a pig and then they'll serve it for dinner, right? Like they'll do, it's like almost those like things you hear in the stories where they have people who visited like villages and what they do for royalty. But like having big meals is a huge thing. Like if you go to a Filipino party, you'll expect people to put a lot of food. Like if you have 10 people over, they'll feed 30 or 40. Like it's like a status thing. And it's a really interesting thing too. Like you're always, if you go to a Filipino home, they always want you to eat, like similar to Nuria. So even if you're full, you have to eat. Like, or like, do you like eat more, you're not eating enough. But in our culture too, like you're expected to eat more, but then not look fat, right? So it's like they'll shame you on eating too much, but then they'll also push you to eat. So I grew up with eat more is better. I've had like, because we were like, I guess with the hybrid of eating North American diet, we did a lot of buffeting. Like we didn't even call it going to the buffet for a special occasion. It's like buffeting. So we eat more, and it was more like desirable to eat more, but then we were shamed for being overweight. So our relationship with food, we don't really know a lot about nutrition. Filipinos tend to not have as much vegetables in our diet. It's usually meat and rice. So it's like, and a lot of Filipinos don't feel full without enough rice. And so coming into North America and then low carb diets or whatever, it's just unheard of for us. But now it's kind of thinking, if I do have a party, I do end up buying too much food. Like I'll just have it catered, or I'll buy things and I'll have so much food, like just the same way as like not having enough people to sit. They'll just pick all their food and they'll sit, and then everyone has to take food home. So it's kind of my relationship with food now. I just kind of really appreciate vegetables. So I do try to be more plant-based, but then when I want to go and flirt becoming vegan, it's so hard thinking about, like, it's almost a betrayal to my culture that I can't eat meat anymore because we have so many meat dishes. And if I put it with tofu or tempeh, it's just like, you're just kind of like, you don't want to eat it, right? And you feel like you almost lose a part of yourself when you change, like even just the diet. because our culture is known for our food so much. So that's really my relationship with food. I do try to see if I can plant-base it with our traditional recipes, but something so comforting and feeling at home when you eat your food that's been, traditionally made.
I would say that for me, I think when I was younger, I mean, this whole discussion of food cannot be separated from body image. And like, that's a huge topic. And body image for like women, especially, because I definitely do think that in society, there's like different standards for those. But I think for me, when I was, let's say, like before I moved here, when I was 15, before then, I would say I had a very healthy relationship with food, in the sense that I like to eat everything. I enjoy food. I didn't have any kind of resistance towards it, or not that I remember, but I would say starting probably around 14 or even a bit before, I did started kind of, the diet culture started getting inside my brain. And that's when, the kind of like the more difficult relationship began with, like, trying to control, trying to, eat less or eat. I would say my first year here, where, again, here, diet culture, I would say it's probably even stronger than back in Venezuela for some reason. And I mean, diet culture, the new version of diet culture, which is a lot of the times just called like healthy eating kind of thing, but it's just like the same thing, just packaged differently. I would be kind of obsessed with the whole like low carb, and kind of like I started kind of rejecting my rice and all those things. And I had a long time when I was kind of like in a difficult relationship with rice, and I'm very happy that now I kind of reintegrated that part, and I have found a way to kind of, make peace with like the traditional foods that I like, and just find a way that it's, good for me and my body. And it's a constant kind of evolving relationship. But I would say I kind of went through that phase where you kind of reject the whole thing, and you're kind of like, I try to do, I mean, even more recently, I would say maybe like 6-7 years ago, I was more into fitness, and I got super into going to like CrossFit type workouts, like every, 4 times a week or something. And then it's like you start getting a new mindset. I tried keto for a while. I tried this, I tried that. And during that time, I do see that link. It's almost like there's a reverse kind of correlation. Like the more I started kind of embracing this like keto and North American type of diet mentality culture, the more I was kind of like rejecting my own foods, and my more like cultural foods. Let's say, like, I don't know, my empanadas, my like sweet potato, whatever, in like ceviche peruano, whatnot, or arepas in Venezuela. So yeah, I definitely went through that whole phase, even not too long ago, I would say, of kind of getting into that diet culture, kind of like trying to control and so on. And now I got into a more relaxed place, not so rigid, not so like a more harmonious relationship with food. But I would say, wait, I had a point I wanted to say that that I forgot. It's gonna come back. But yeah, I would say it's a concept. Oh yeah, the thing with like, I do think that food can be a really good teacher. I mean, looking back, I have seen that, yeah, food can be a great teacher. Everyone kind of mentioned the whole people pleasing thing, where we totally ignore our body signals to fit in with the society. I mean, with the group around us. That is something I learned a little bit thanks to diet culture and some kind of like wellness coachy type of concepts, but it's something that I was really glad to have learned, because once you have that awareness, when you're like, oh, I'm just like saying yes to more because I want to people please. And yes, sometimes we also say yes to more because some foods are literally just designed to kind of like light up all the circuits in the body, and you're kind of like eating chips or something. You're like, damn, they're so good, I just want to keep eating them. But it can be it has been, at least for me, a great source of awareness and kind of connection with my body as well. So yeah, it's been a lot of things, but I have gone through periods of kind of like rejection of my cultural foods and then reintegration, and it's been that dance there.
I'd like to add something that Stephanie touched a little bit about. In this country, how easily we get like assimilated by the culture that is in place, because I just remember how frustrating it was for me not finding the ingredients to make Mexican food, right? So because if you go to the grocery to get your groceries, like there is like when you go to the Mexican, if that's the case, that you can that they have like a Mexican food, or it's just awful. Like it's to make burritos, which is not Mexican food. Like you see the label, like, okay, you're Mexican, so you are allowed to make this meal that we consider Mexican food, not the Mexican food that you ate growing up, is this one. So it's, you have to fit in that category of how they portray you. So it's really frustrating. It's really frustrating because it doesn't matter that you say, by any chance, do you have this kind, what? And they look at you like, what is that, right? So culturally speaking, more than how can I pass along to my daughters some recipes or some traditions around food, it's just like I cannot make them because we don't have the ingredients, right? So I cannot say, well, imagine that there is like a sort of tomato that tastes like like I cannot do that, right? So it's, I would say, I understand, right? If you don't have like, and it goes back to capitalism, if you don't have a massive group of this minority group, it's not worth it to import those ingredients, right? Like the house is losing money, so forget it. It's not going to happen. We're going to bring in products that we know for a fact we're going to sell and that Canadians going to like. So everything is based on what the market requires, not your cultural practices, right? So yeah, there is like my relationship with food sometimes now, it's frustration, and more when people say like, oh, you're Mexican, when are you making like some Mexican dish and you can bring it? No, because I don't even have the ingredients, and there is this expectation that for sure you know how to do it.
I love how you said that, Darian. Like this is my conundrum coming from Toronto, very diverse. Like you can literally eat an ethnicity every single meal of your day, of your week, from different countries. And then I came to Victoria, BC. If you don't know where Victoria, BC, check it in the map. All the way on the other side of the North America from Toronto. And I had to research. I'm like, one, is there Asian restaurants here so I can eat something Asian? Because I'm that ignorant that I don't know local culture. But like, I just went to Vancouver and I really wanted to go to Asian grocery. And I'm like, Vanessa, I need to go to Asian grocery so I can load up on stuff. Because if I come here, I can't. Like it's so limited, or I have to drive a while. But it is true, like having a little kind of, we have a Filipino section in the Walmart, and it's just like this. And it's just like all processed food, like like instant noodles. type of thing. And I'm just like, it's so challenging because it makes you feel like you're missing that piece of you. It's just so ingrained in our genes. Like, I'm like, please, like if I go to Toronto, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go and load up, but it's challenging. And I do agree. People are like, oh, so you're gonna make pancit if you come to my party, or you're gonna come make lumpia? I'm like, I am very Canadian. I can make salad. You know, it's like I can buy it. If I was in Toronto, I'd buy it, but it is really interesting how people view it. And I would love to hear more Mexican authentic Mexican dishes and Venezuelan and authentic Chinese dishes, so I can be more versed. Maybe we can start a thread on our Facebook for traditional dishes and challenge the community to see if they can come up with it.
I would love that. I think I have something scheduled for it, but yeah, I would love to, like, that's another way to like really connect through food, is sharing recipes, right? Like, so I think that would be really fun to do. Something that, yeah, so going back to kind of even just the aspect of like living in America and then having these, you know, the different cultures of food, and how, you know, sometimes like their definition of what our foods are. I mean, I guess this is where the integration of like fusion food happens, right? Like where I think sometimes even I get confused, like, is this actually Chinese or is this like a fusion, you know, right? Like, is this actually, like, where is this, which part of Asia is this from? Which part of China is this from, right? Like there's so many different kinds of cuisines, even within Chinese food, right? And so it's so interesting to even start to kind of learn. I know now one of my favorite types of Chinese food would be like Szechuan cuisine, right? Love that. But yeah, I also wanted to share, like, even just for myself, like the relationship with food was, there's always so much meaning behind food that I actually kind of grew up a little stressed out about food, because I would have to think about what food I would be integrating today, because then it would mean something, you know? I mean, my earliest memory, like, I think, well, I already shared about like the fish eyeball and the bitter melon, but another aspect was like, you know, the whole aspect of like finishing all your food meant that, like, you know, you're grateful and you're full, right? Like, but also like even the rice in your bowl, you couldn't leave a single rice grain left in your bowl. And if you did, it meant that your future boyfriend was going to have that many acne on their face. Like, it was just like these myths and stories that were integrated into your food. And so I think maybe that's why I avoided rice, like similar to Sonia. Like, I learned these things and I started to kind of reject my own culture. Like, I didn't want to have rice after a while because it was just so stressful to have rice and make sure I finish all my rice. So I turned to noodles, right? I mean, even like, you know, your birthday, you got to have noodles on your birthday because it meant like long life. So you have to have like certain foods on certain days. And so that to me was a little bit stressful. And even just gathering, you know, we're talking about big meals, putting big meals together. It was a performance for my family. This is where like the perfectionism gets tied in here as well, right? Like, and talking about status of food, it's like, oh, the type of food you serve as well. Like for Chinese food, seafood meant you had more money. So if you like served crab, you served lobster, you served like clams, like that meant you're that much more higher status, right? That means like the bigger deal the meal was, right? So I think for me, I just like stuck to spaghetti and meatballs, and like what was pasta was easiest, right? Like that was where it was like, okay, I'm just going to take on this the role of being the Canadian girl who didn't know any traditions. And that was my escape from like learning the traditional foods, because it was just so stressful to be able to kind of like put together that food, that it was just easier for me to just like default to, oh, you're coming over, I'm going to make spaghetti meatballs for you kind of thing, or make some kind of pasta dish. Right. And so, yeah, I think it's so interesting how, I mean, even I was thinking when we were talking about different, access to different cultures and foods, I think this is where, a lot of new immigrants start to gather together and create communities, right? Like I'm very fortunate, like living in Vancouver, there are different communities where you can go to get like Korean food. You would go to actually my area here in Coquitlam, there's a lot of Korean food here. And then there's like a strip on Kingsway, like you kind of know where to go. There's like, I know in New York, there's Little Italy, right? Like you kind of go to these places then to have the different foods, right? So it's so interesting, like, just thinking about colonization and even now, thinking about the culture with food, we have to take pictures of everything we eat, right? Like that aspect of status with food still continues, right? Like, it's like, oh, let's show it. And the aspect of performance still comes through. It's like, oh, let's show everybody what I'm eating today. Let's show everybody what I'm making today. And sometimes I'll think about like, oh, I'm having like noodles and just steamed vegetables. That's all I'm going to do. I'm going to make it easy for myself. Do I show a picture of that? No, it's not good enough to show a picture, right? Like, so there's so much to talk about on this. Like, I mean, like even Sonia had mentioned about the body image thing for myself. It was like the emotional eating started coming, right? Like it was just, that was a way for me to feel better, but that's a whole other topic. There's so much to talk about here. But really, at the end of the day, meaning behind food, there's just so much that we could talk about with different kinds of food. And I love this topic. And I can't wait for us to like gather with more of you in the community to dive in deeper about this topic. So we have a discussion happening on April 9th. And that's a Saturday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern time. So we'd love for you to come out and we'd love to hear about your experiences with food. And we'll start a thread in the Facebook group with talking about all the different recipes. Is there anything else we want to add to this discussion? No.
I'm hungry.
I know, right?
I'm hungry. I'm like all right.
What are we going to eat today?
I know. Oh my gosh.
Right? And that's another thing. It's like thinking about the next meal. That's one of the things we're always like thinking about. What's the next meal? What's the next meal? What's happening in the next meal? Right? All right. Okay. Lots of love to you. Thank you. All of you. Look forward to seeing you at our next meetup.